Okay, so
This is funny.
we are actually we're going to go very quickly through this unit. I know the key things that you're going to need for the test, and so those are the things that we're going to really focus on. Again, I am marking down all the things that we skip or don't get into in great detail that you don't need to be more successful on our state test, and we will come back to that, all right? But I do know the things that you need to be as successful as you can on the test. So we're going to, these next two units, we're going to be going very quickly through, and that way we're going to cover what you need to know and make sure we get through all the material before the test, instead of like covering this like in great detail and then not getting to genetics, which would be not good. Yes?
We have a science state test.
There is. So 5th grade, 8th grade, and then again as a sophomore in biology. And that'll be your last science test. Dang. Yeah. Okay. So we said that there's two types of cell reproduction. We have mitosis and we have meiosis. Right now we're just on the mitosis. Mitosis can be used, we said, for our body cells can use it for growth, can use it for repair, if something's worn out, if those cells get damaged, or they just reach the end of their natural life cycle. And we said that, one kind of fun fact, well, gross fact, is that, we slough off body cells all the time, and about 9 pounds a year. Yuck, right? And it's kind of yucky when you think about it. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to regenerate parts of ourselves, but some organisms do. And then there are some organisms that use mitosis for reproduction. So humans, we decided, do not use that method, right? We do not use that cloning sort of method. Yes?
How do we know that it's 9 pounds?
I messed it up.
I don't know, Zach. How do we know anything? Like people have data, like they make estimates, right? Do we know exactly? No. But I'm sure like if like they keep a person in a room and they can measure that and then they times it by 365 maybe. That'd be one way to do it. Do I know exactly? No. That'd be a good bet though. Okay, so all the cells in our body are called body cells. Fancy name, right?
Whoa.
Except for those gametes. Remember, the gametes are the sex cells. So every other cell in our body is considered a body cell, whether it's hair, liver, skin, heart, muscle, kidney, whatever type of cell that is not the sex cells. All right. Gametes, also known as the sex cells. All right, so here's slide number 7 where we're starting. If we're talking the process of mitosis, what happens is it's going to form 2 genetically identical nuclei. Again, nuclei is the plural form of the word nucleus. And the end game, or kind of what will be the final product of body cells, are to make new body cells that will replace those dead, those worn out, those damaged cells, or the ones that are just at their natural end of their life cycle. Okay, so those skin cells that have sloughed off, they've just reached the end of their life cycle and they're done, right? And so if there's nothing there to replace them, eventually we'd have no skin. So it's a really good thing that there's mitosis that will replace those skin cells that are now at the end of their life cycle. If we're talking reproduction, so an organism that uses cloning, that asexual form of reproduction, thank you, the end game is to make a brand new organism that is genetically identical, and that is the key. It will be genetically identical to the parent organism. So it's basically a clone, right? And so if it's a body cell, it's repairing, replacing, fixing a cell. If it is for reproduction, it's to make a new organism. Here's some advantages. If we're talking for reproduction, an organism that uses asexual reproduction or mitosis for reproduction, there's only one parent needed. doesn't have to find a mate, it doesn't have to depend on someone else. It can reproduce all on its own. And so if that one parent is healthy and it's doing well in the environment that it's in, chances are an identical clone or offspring will also be successful and thrive and do well in that same environment, okay? And again, that just kind of makes sense. If the parent's healthy, the offspring should be healthy. The process of mitosis also requires less energy for the parent organism. It doesn't take as long, it doesn't take as much energy, so it's an easier process, and less chance for there to be random mutations or errors that happen during the process too. And usually it's faster. So those are all advantages. Okay, that thing might be a little too strong. Okay, so I'm gonna go through these quickly because I'm not gonna test you. This is not gonna be something that is on your state test. When you go to biology, you're gonna get into this pretty heavy. So I want you to at least be introduced to it. I want you to have heard the words and understand the basic process of what's going on. But you're never gonna be asked in 8th grade science to be like, okay, what are the phases of mitosis? What happens at interphase 1? What's happening at telophase? It's just to have a general overview of the process. So I'm gonna go quickly, and if you're kind of like, you just kind of get like, yeah, okay, like that makes sense. That's kind of all I'm after. You're not gonna have to know the specifics. It's just to kind of give you that background knowledge, because I think it actually kind of helps understand the whole process if you can understand what's going on with the individual cell. So you can see here in our little circle graph, we have interphase is taking up the majority of the cell's time. And so then we have this little cell division period right here. And so these are the 4 main phases that are going to actually divide or split that single cell. Okay, so there's 3 main parts. We have the interphase, which is our preparation, which is in gray here. We have the actual cell division, which are these purpley parts. And then we have the cytokinesis, which is the actual like splitting of the cell. And now you go from 1 and it splits into 2. Right? And so the process for an adult human body cell, so like our skin cell that needs to be replaced, takes about 24 hours. And so if you have a cut, if you have a burn or some kind of damage, you know, it's not going to be instantaneous, that healing. It takes, you know, depending on how deep or how intense the injury is, you know, that's going to play obviously a part in how long it takes to replace those cells. Okay. And so the interphase takes about 18 to 20 hours of that, and then the actual mitosis part takes about 2 hours total. So here's what happens during interphase, right? So we have, the cell is going to double in size. The DNA is going to replicate. So these little things, this is the DNA where it's uncondensed. It reminds me of like a giant hairball. All the DNA is this long strands, and it's just like this big giant mess, okay? That is going to double, okay? The DNA is going to replicate itself. The organelles are also going to double. So any organelles, so like the ribosomes, the mitochondria, the vacuoles, right? All of those things are going to double. So we had 2 of these, now we have 4, right? Now we start into prophase. Notice that the nuclear membrane, back up a little bit, you can see it's nice and solid here. Organelles double. And now you can see the DNA is going to condense into chromosomes. So instead of the hairball, they're going to rearrange into our chromosomes. Okay? And then these spindles form. Spindles remind me almost like a fishing line, where they are going to be able to latch on to the centromere, the part that kind of connects the chromosomes, and then be able to pull those chromosomes apart. So these things are called centrioles, and they're moving towards opposite sides of the cell. Okay? And this nuclear membrane starts to disappear. Right? It's gonna allow the chromosomes to kind of be free floating and not isolated in the nucleus. Right, so now the nuclear membrane is gone, the chromosomes are there, the centrioles are here, the spindle fibers are ready to do their thing. They actually like hook on and move from, like the centrioles kind of have the spindle fibers coming off of them, and they hook on and move them all around and line them up in the center. We call this the equator. If you think about the equator of our Earth, right, it basically would cut the Earth right in half. So like this could be like lined up this way, just happens to be showing it like this. But the chromosomes are lined up in the middle of the equator. And then they get separated. The centromeres, where they connect, is called the centromere. And so the spindle fibers are going to pull this one this way, and this one this way, this one this way, this one this way, right? And so you end up with a complete set of the organelles over here, and a complete set of the organelles over here, and complete sets of those chromosomes as well. Once everything has kind of been divvied up, the nuclear membrane starts to form again, the chromosomes unwind, and cytokinesis begins. It's kind of like that pinching off of the cell, because this is like all fluid, right, that the nucleus is kind of floating around in. And so it's going to just start to kind of pinch until it gets where it's connected, and then it pinches off and you get two separate cells. And this is the end result of that. This is exactly like, if you look at this, it's exactly like what the cell looked like before the whole process began. So you started with one, and you end up with two daughter cells that are identical. Yes?
Does that DNA just stay like two different parts? Or does it ever join back?
No. So hold that thought. When we get to meiosis, you'll kind of see like how things can get separated and rearranged a little bit. But just think of it, just understand that it has a complete set of the full DNA the way it is. Okay? And so you end up with these two things called two daughter cells. This is what it might look like for a plant cell. And so it has the stiff cell wall. You see the nucleus, you see the chromosomes, all, hairball-like. Now they've condensed. These things are the spindle fibers. And so you can see them hooking onto the centromeres and kind of getting them lined up. Now the spindle fibers are attached to the centromere and they are separating them, right? And so this is starting the process of cytokinesis, where you have the two new nuclei that are formed. So this is kind of the cartoon version. These are actual images from electron microscope, looking at the slides, going through the cells, going through these different phases. And so you can kind of see the real life version and then like the more cartoony version. Right? And these are plant cells. Okay. This is what it looks like. It's not quite as clear as the plant cell, but these are animal cells. And so again, we have the firm nucleus. The nuclear membrane has, disappeared. We have our centrioles moving down here, the spindle fibers coming off of them, starting to line the chromosomes up. And the chromosomes are at the equator, the spindle fibers are attached to the centromeres, they separate it. Now we have a full set here and a full set here. Because remember, the DNA duplicated at the beginning. So if you have double the DNA, if you cut it in half, then you end up with a full normal amount, right, a complete amount. And again, you can kind of see it down here. It's a little bit fuzzier, not nearly as clear kind of as our plant example, but that's what it looks like. Okay, so here's some examples of organisms that will use mitosis for reproduction. So those we're just looking at like body cells going through that process. The same process can happen if we're talking about reproduction or cloning, that asexual reproduction. So there's a process called fission where there's organisms that have no nucleus and they divide into two identical organisms. These are the group called prokaryotes. They're very simple. You'll get into this a little bit more in biology as well. And again, you're not going to need to really like identify, oh, this is the fission process. This is just so you kind of know some examples of things that are different processes that are considered asexual reproduction. There's also something called budding, where it's a small exact copy of the adult grows from the body of the parent. So here's a hydra, and then there's this little bud that comes off of the main branch or the main body of the hydra, and it forms an identical little offspring. So if that would be cut, or if that would fall off, it would be its own unique, or its own identical hydra that is exactly like the parent that it formed from.
So it's like a tree.
We call that budding.
Looks like a tree.
A little bit. There's also the idea of regeneration, where a whole new organism grows from a piece of the parent. And Shelby, this is probably what you were talking about, like that your mom does with like the cuttings. I know strawberry plants, this is very popular, potatoes. You can just take like a little piece and then bury it, and it will grow into an identical, genetically identical potato or strawberry plant. Those are two real common ones. So a lot of gardeners use this process. It doesn't need another plant to fertilize it. It can just basically make a copy of itself, and you have a clone. Okay, so those are three of the real common forms of asexual reproduction, where it's one parent, the offspring is genetically identical, and that's really what you need to know, that if we're talking mitosis for reproduction, it's an identical offspring, one parent, and that's kind of the important part. Okay? So mitosis, if we're talking for our body cells, so not reproduction, anytime you hear body cells, you're thinking, okay, any cell in my body, or in the dog, the cat, whatever, in the body of that organism. So we have these two daughter cells, and Zach had a good question. He's like, why do we call them daughter? And it's something I usually bring up because it is kind of funny, like, why? Why wouldn't we just call them son cells or, child cells, right? But the term that they use are the daughter cells, so that's what we'll use. Excuse me. And so the key is that they're genetically identical, and they're usually used to help with growth, with healing, with replacement. And so those are the functions of cells, or the purpose of cells going through mitosis: growth, repair, replacement. Reproduction, the two daughter cells are formed, and they start an organism that's genetically identical. So if this is the parent cell, here's the DNA, it duplicates or replicates, right? And so now this strand is now two strands, this strand is now two, this strand is now two, and this strand is now two. And they are connected together. Those are called homologous chromosomes. And those homologous chromosomes are connected at that center location, or that centromere, right? It goes through the process of mitosis, and what you get are two identical daughter cells to this parent cell. And you can see this here, and this kind of shows the cytokinesis, the splitting of that cell.
Oh, dang it.
Okay? Here's some more vocab for you. Daughter cells are diploid cells that contain two sets of chromosomes. Okay? Diploid kind of sounds like double. Okay? We identify these as 2N. N is just the random number, the random variable letter that we have assigned to them. It doesn't have any specific meaning. They could have used X, they could have used Y, they could have used whatever letter they want. But they've chosen N. So we identify them as 2N. Right? Where N is used for the number of chromosome pairs that are present. And this number varies by species. So humans, we have 23 total chromosome pairs, but we have 46 individual chromosomes. Okay, think of things that come in pairs. What are some things that come in pairs?
Shoes.
Shoes, socks.
Oh.
Oh.
I thought
Gloves
about
for
it.
2 hands, right?
Contacts.
Ooh, contacts, because you have 2 eyes, hopefully.
Eyeball.
Then you only have 1 contact, and it's not a pair of contacts, it's just a single contact. What about earrings? Usually they come in a pair, because you have 2 ears, if you're choosing to wear 2.
Nails.
What?
Like if you get your nails done. Like you don't just get one done.
Okay,
Like a pair.
yeah, but we don't call them a pair of a set, yeah, or a set, because we're thinking there should be 10, yes.
This one.
Gloves.
Pair of gloves. What about a pair of headphones? So things usually that go with 2 items, we call them a pair. Why do you think we call them a pair of pants?
Because you have 2 legs.
2 legs, right? And so usually, like, we just are so used to calling them things, a pair of pants, a pair of headphones, a pair of earrings, that we don't really think about why we call it that. But it's because it's for 2 of something, right? 2 eyeballs, 2 ears, 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 legs. Okay. And so this contains 2 sets of chromosomes, 23 pairs. So if I have 23 pairs of shoes, I have a total of 46 individual shoes, right? So that's kind of how I think about this. If it's talking pairs, there's really 2 of them, right? So this is a pair, but it's actually 2 chromosomes. This is a pair, but this is actually 2 of them. All of these 22 chromosomes are called autosomes. Those are the chromosomes that have the instructions for everything in our body that has to do with everything except for our reproduction. The sex chromosomes are the ones, are the 23rd pair of chromosomes, and they are different, right? There's an X and a Y, okay? Would this individual be a male or a female? Does anybody know? What do you think, Haley? Why? How do you know that? Oh, you watched the video? Cool, okay. So males will have a Y chromosome. How would this show a female? What would that Y have to be? An X. Very good. So a female has 2 X's, a male has an X and a Y. So this would be showing the karyotype, we call this, the arrangement of the chromosomes for a male human. Okay? And so this is, like I said, this is how the human karyotype or kind of chromosomes would be displayed. Okay? Each of these pairs of chromosomes, like this might carry the instructions for your hair color, eye color, skin color, and heart function, right? This might carry the information, and we'll talk more about this as we get to genetics, but each of these it's like a different chapter. So each chapter of the book contains a different set of instructions for a specific function of your body. And so if there's damage to just like one set of chromosomes, like that's the part, like if that had to do with, let's say skin tone. So somebody who's albino, maybe they would have like a random mutation that would affect at chromosome 3. And I'm just making this up, I'm not sure. We know like what pretty much, I think we have about 90-some% of our chromosomes mapped. Like we know what body function, what trait, what the instructions are on each set of chromosomes at this point. But I'm just kind of like randomly making things up. But if there was some kind of mutation for skin tone and it was on chromosome 3, then we would know, hey, there's some kind of damage to chromosome 3 because those instructions were kind of interrupted or, there was an issue with them. And we'll get into that a lot more when we get into some more of our genetics. But the key here is that these are considered, the cells that are created are considered diploid. They are double. They have they are basically the full set of information. Okay, and this is going to you can see where it says the diploid number. The diploid is going to be the big number. It's the 2N. So if you have the N, which we'll talk about with meiosis, You put a 2 in front of it, basically you're doubling it. You're multiplying by 2. So diploid sounds like double, and the 2N represents the double, the big full number. So this is showing the number of chromosomes for a buffalo, right? A human, we have a total of 46 chromosomes, right? So we have 23 pairs, but individual chromosomes, we have 46. Notice that there is no correlation or connection. Like a pig only has 38, but they say that pigs are actually supposed to be some of the highest functioning, most intelligent animals that we have, okay? So the number of chromosomes doesn't match, like a dog has 78, doesn't mean it's like the best or the smartest or the most intelligent or there's any advantage to that. It's just what they have. And it has nothing to do with size either. It's not like, you know, the bigger the organism, the more chromosomes they have. So there is no kind of correlation to that. It's just, you know, what that organism or that species specifically has. Okay. Okay. So kind of a wrap up. Mitosis allows body cells to grow, replace, and just basically fix anything that is wrong, or if we're growing, we need to add more cells to accommodate that growth. So this is like examples of skin cells, blood cells, lung cells, right? If we're talking for asexual reproduction, then this is the creation of a new organism that is genetically identical to that single parent. Okay, so body cells use mitosis for these processes. Certain species will use mitosis for asexual reproduction. And so those are the things that go together. They also make those diploid, those new cells contain that diploid number of chromosomes. They have that full set of genetic information, which makes sense because if you double the genetic information and then cut it in half during mitosis, you end up with the full amount that you needed anyways, right? And if you're making a new cell, that cell needs all the information, right? If you're making a new organism, that new organism that's being created or cloned needs all the information. So again, try not to memorize that, but just kind of think about it logically, right? And I think, yeah, let's stop right there. We have a few videos that I want to backtrack and watch.